Hi again. In A History of Christianity by Kenneth Latourette, he's dealing with the conquest of the Saxons. Some would say the forced conversion of Saxons and Scandinavians. Most of it wasn't forced, but some of it was. And here he's dealt with the fact that by about 950, the conversion of Scandinavians was well underway. He says, from the preceding summary, all too brief, of the conversion of the peoples of Western Europe, it will be seen how largely it was by mass movements of entire tribes or peoples, led by the chieftains or kings. As the numerical triumph of Christianity in the Roman Empire had been completed by mass conversion, encouraged and latterly enforced by the emperors, so in these much smaller units, which made up Western Europe in this period, that faith was adopted as the religion of the community, usually at the command of at least with the energetic assistance of the prince. Here we must note the contrast between the theology officially held in the church in the West and the practice, a contrast which was to continue down to our own day, not only in the Catholic Church of the West, but also in large wings of its major offshoot, Protestantism. The theology was Augustinian, and in theory held that only through God's grace could anyone be saved, that the recipients of grace were predestined, and that presumably, as Augustine had held, their number was infallibly fixed. As a corollary of predestination, all chosen by God would be saved through irresistible grace and the perseverance of the saints. Those not chosen would not be saved, regardless of what they or others, such as missionaries, might attempt to do. In apparent contradiction of that conviction, whole tribes and peoples were baptized and given Christian instruction and the other ministries of the church. There seems to be no evidence that any of the missionaries were troubled by the paradox. If they were, they might have taken refuge in the findings of the Synod of Orange in 529, findings which had papal approval and which held that by grace transmitted through baptism, all who had received that right can, if they labor faithfully, do those things which belong to the salvation of the soul. Since through mass conversions baptism was practically universal and was given in infancy to successive generations, it followed that all might be saved if they worked together with God, performing those things which were held to be commanded by him through the church. That the Catholic Church acted on the assumption that this could be accomplished was evidence of a basic optimism which we are to see persisting in the West, both in that church and in Protestantism. It was also in the Eastern churches, and particularly in the Greek wing of the Catholic Church. But here it was not so marked. That it was no stronger in the East may have been due to the greater obstacles which the churches there faced, nearer as they were to the heartland of Eurasia and to the vast populations of Asia. Especially did the prospect seem hopeless for those Christians who were confronted by Islam. How far in these conversions in the West was the gospel understood and really accepted? Could the professedly Christian communities be knit together into an inclusive fellowship, exemplifying the basic Christian tie of love? Much of the alleged Christianity was obviously very superficial, quite without comprehension of the real import of the gospel. However, most of the missionaries through whom the instruction was given were monks. That meant that they were, in principle, fully committed to the Christian faith and to carrying out thoroughly its precepts in their own lives. It is significant, moreover, that often second and even first generation converts became noted exemplars of the faith, and that the nominal winning of the Anglo-Saxons had scarcely been completed before missionaries from England were going to the continent. We find such characters as Willibrord and Boniface and scores of others, whom we have not the space so much as to name, who bear unmistakably the distinctive marks of Christian character, and who as such were revered by many of their contemporaries, even though but few sought to emulate them. These many tribal, embryonic, national Christian communities possessed a common tie in the Church of Rome. The popes were increasingly acknowledged as the visible head of the Church, and to a greater or less extent exercised supervision. Rome was a center of pilgrimage. From all over Western Europe the devout flocked to its churches and shrines. It was sadly shrunken from the days of its imperial splendor, but now was a period when Nowhere in Western Europe were there cities of any size. Rome was impressive even in its ruins, and still possessed imposing churches and shrines sacred to the memories of the two greatest of the apostles, Peter and Paul. Here also were to be had miracle-working relics of saints and martyrs to be carried back to the monasteries and churches of the several lands of Western Europe. Next time he's dealing with the Carolingian revival. Speaking of crises leading to conversions and mass conversions in the case of the Roman Empire, not national conversions at this point, but massive conversions in terms of numbers. We're talking about the pandemic in the 3rd century. There had been pandemics before, but the one in the middle of the 3rd century was particularly devastating. And it was during that period that Christianity really began to have an impact in the Roman Empire. So I'll put in a video, it's first of 2 or 3 really, linked together, where we discuss pandemic in the 3rd century and how it led to the rise of Christianity from Rodney Stark's book, The Rise of Christianity. See you soon.